everybody. Thank you for coming to spend an hour of your morning with the Community Foundation in coordination with Long-Term Disaster Recovery Group. As many of you know, and many of you are accustomed to joining us on a monthly basis, the Community Foundation has been convening these monthly flood recovery calls in coordination with Long-Term Disaster Recovery Group, just to make sure that we have a good connection between community and the recovery of the flood that is still actively occurring within Midland County and our region as a whole. So today's topic is really just exploring the next steps of flood recovery. And so as we go to the next slide, we'll give you a little bit of an overview as to what you can expect for today. So we always begin the agenda with just providing an overview of the purpose of these calls. We want to make sure that we explain to everyone and even to ourselves that we are keeping a real pulse and heartbeat on the process and current activity as it relates to flood recovery within our community. And these monthly Zoom calls are one way that we can do that with our community in general. And so these calls are really to connect community members with various topics, themes, and trends that are occurring within flood recovery that might be of use to all of you. And we have ranged them from talking about neighbors helping neighbors to discussing the financial support strategies to the setup of our coordinated long-term disaster recovery group. So they really do run the full gamut. We encourage all of you to go on to the Midland Foundation website and check out the past recorded calls and topics. They are really beneficial, just if you're looking for some high-level overviews of flood recovery. And as you were prompted when you first logged in, this video is being recorded so we can add this to the running list of topics and flood calls that we are uploading to our website. So today's call is just an hour long, and we plan to have our speakers chat with all of you for about 45 minutes this morning. We want to leave a few minutes at the end of the call for any sort of questions, comments, wrap up, and just give some space if there are any sort of burning questions that people might have. Today's call, as I mentioned, is focusing on those next steps of flood recovery. So really what we want you to walk away with today is maybe just a bit more of an understanding of the regional perspective as it relates to flood recovery and the dam failures in general. As many of you know, this dam failure event did not just impact Midland County, it impacted surrounding communities and counties as well. And so we will hear a little bit about that. As we talk about the next steps within our flood recovery process, as we've now moved past the 1-year mark of the post-dam failure, we know that we really can't do that intentionally without taking a look back as to what has happened over the last year, and specifically as it relates to Midland County. We want to share a bit more of the direct service work that has occurred and is continuing to occur through our disaster case management team, and just share some stories of impact, but also some high-level data that might help just drive an understanding of the process that's happening. And then finally, we're going to move into this next steps conversation. And you're going to hear today just a little bit about what that means from both a regional perspective and a local Midland County perspective. So if you don't mind advancing that slide, Emily. Alrighty, so before we get too far into the conversation today, we like to kind of center everyone on the Midland County vision statement. Midland County vision statement is not part of the Community Foundation's vision statement or mission statement, but we align to the Midland County vision statement. And honestly, so does long-term flood recovery, because we know that flood recovery is bigger than any one entity or organization. It is a partnership and a collective whole of all of the individual parts. And so Midland County's vision statement is together, forward, bold, an exceptional place where everyone thrives. We know that in order to support a thriving community, we have to have all of these collaborative entities at play, co-occurring with one another. And so that really is the essence of flood recovery as we look at it as the collective whole of impact to this Midland County vision. So today you are going to hear from a couple of people that I am honored to call friends as we navigate this flood recovery process together. We have two presenters on the call today. Nancy Money will not be joining us. She had an unexpected event come up, but we did want to leave her picture and her name up here as well, because Nancy is an instrumental part of the long-term flood recovery and the disaster case management team as it relates to where our community has been and where it is going. So Nancy works as the Director of Community Impact at United Way of Midland County, and she also oversees the large FEMA grant dollars that you'll hear a little bit more about in relation to flood recovery. The two people that are on the line to share stories and data and information and next steps with you are my colleagues, Reagan and Katie. So both of them are within the disaster case management team for long-term flood recovery of Midland County. And so I have the honor to be able to just introduce a very high level overview to all of you. Reagan comes to us as one of the disaster case managers for Midland County. And ultimately, I think what brought her to this position was her love for community and for humans in general. She really has a fundamental belief that people are better together and better in community, working towards a coordinated effort or outcome. And so really through her experiences as she was graduating from Saginaw Valley amidst a pandemic, she really saw the isolative community that we were all facing. And so this opportunity to be able to collaborate and to connect with flood survivors in the wake of the 2020 dam failure seemed like a solid fit for her and her passions as it relates to community and to humanity in general. So Reagan, I appreciate you being here with us today. And then Katie Vocal is also part of the disaster case management team. She has spent the majority of her adult life as a Midland County resident and has had the honor to raise her 4 children here in the community. She is not new to flood recovery work and disaster case management. She was one of our disaster case managers in the 2017 flood and has returned in the 2020 dam failure flood devastation to support case management and support a coordinated effort of rebuilding and revitalizing the community. Ultimately, she has a lot of passion for supporting people and community as they navigate through the intense emotions and experiences and chaos of flood recovery in general. So Katie, I also thank you for being with us today. Before I kick it over to the both of you, I would like to be able to just show a quick little 2.5-minute video to all of you. This is really just a quick depiction of some pictures as to 2020 versus 2021. Maybe some of you have seen this. This was published right around that 1-year mark of after the dams failed just a few weeks ago. And so there is no narrative component to it. If the audio gets any sort of messy, it's just some music playing in the background. So Emily, if you want to go ahead and play that, that would be super helpful.
This beachfront Verbo is about to become part of an unforgettable vacation memory. The moment when
Thanks, Emily. And so again, we just wanted to start out with that quick snippet of a video, really to show that our community has come so far in many different ways. And we want to give honor to that. And that's a little bit about what you're going to hear today. We also just wanted to then name the fact that we still have a ways to go. And that's really where Katie and Reagan's kind of looking at the next steps conversation will come into play. So Reagan and Katie, I am going to turn it over to you, knowing that the two of you might go back and forth a little bit through your shared dialogue. So please, either of you, feel free to take it away.
I'll go ahead and start. Watching that video, you can see all the progress that we've made, but I'm sure for myself and Ann Wortley, who was another disaster case manager from 2017, when you see all that green space that happens in the video, I can't help but picture the 10 to 20 houses that were, literally washed away with this flooding and dam failure. And so it always gets me choked up. Even though it looks great now, I can remember the people we touched in 2017 and see all they lost. Now our community has been amazing, and that's the stuff I want to focus on and show you. But I just want to make sure that we're not just looking at this video and going, wow, this is great. There's still a lot that needs to be done. And thanks to this community, our region, our state, and our federal government, so much has happened, and we're going to report all the great things that are coming up and still to come. So last year we began undertaking the case management portion, not knowing really all that was going to be needed. In 2017, there were 2 case managers. We had a volunteer construction coordinator, and we were able to, help with the rebuild. But in 2020, what we actually started with is we started with 6 disaster case managers, and that was for the region. And we placed 1 in Saginaw, 1 in Gladwin. There were 2 for the city of Midland. And then there were 2 for Sanford. We had a volunteer disaster case manager step up for Aranac County. We had a volunteer construction manager step forth. And then we ended up going to a part-time construction manager at the start that we paid. And we have a volunteer construction manager that started in 2020 for Gladwin. And then we had a volunteer construction coordinator. So we started a little bit small. Like I said, 6 disaster case managers, a couple volunteer construction managers, a part-time one, and a construction coordinator. And through our first year, we were able to identify 321 clients for the region. So that includes Saginaw, Gladwin, and Midland County. And what we did is through case management, we either started off with FEMA appeals, applications, SBA assistance, and then we also looked for local resources to help. And then we also did funding asks. And I'll let Reagan jump in since she has been more boots on the ground with the case management, and I'll let her address the first year of 321 clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Katie. So we started with our case management back in July of 2020. I just want to note that that was much sooner than what had occurred in the 2017 because the long-term recovery group had already been organized back in 2017. So we were able to start sooner, earlier in the process, and we're able to assist flood survivors much earlier with FEMA applications and SBA applications and things like that. But we are also facing a much larger magnitude of a disaster as well. And so we were really forced to look at the holistic picture with our clients and really understand all of their needs. Because if we look back to 2017, we may have been assisting largely with home repairs, but this time around, we have had clients who really just have had basic needs like food, clothing, water, and those needs have presented at a much higher rate, I think, this time around. I think over 1 in 4 of our clients had those basic needs. And so, yeah, our task has been identifying the flood survivors who have the most barriers and taking them on and walking alongside them to support them forward. And I have one story that I would like to share of a client who was an example of this. When we meet our clients, we try to evaluate all of their needs, be it water or temporary shelter or their financial stability, any number of things. But this one client I met with and started case management with back in August, and they had been displaced from their home. Their home had been torn down to the studs, basically, because of the floodwaters inside, with the help of volunteers. But they didn't want to leave the property, and they were living in a camper nearby. And they were also a senior with limited access to technology to be able to do things like apply for FEMA and SBA, and didn't even have a cell phone until the Red Cross provided them with one. So this is an example of a flood survivor that has a lot of barriers that are standing in the way of them even moving forward and getting their home repaired. And before we could even have conversations about what it would look like to repair the home and what the costs were going to be associated with that, my primary concern was, how do we get this individual out of the camper that they're staying in on site? Because as winter approaches, I was very nervous for the health and safety of this individual. And we had a lot of flood survivors that didn't want to leave their property, whether it was to protect the belongings they still had, or whether it was because that was what they knew to be as home, or maybe they thought they were going to recover a lot quicker, more rapidly than they did. And so they didn't realize they'd be there past the summer. So they thought the camper would be a good solution. And so this client really did not want to leave at first. And thankfully, I want to speak to the fact that case management is holistic, but I also want to speak to the fact that it's collaborative. And so we have lots of organizations that we've been able to collaborate with to advocate for resources for our flood survivors. So for this client in particular, I had advocated for rental assistance for them to move out of this situation. And I had to have a heart-to-heart with them, a tough conversation with them, and say, hey, I'm really worried that I'm going to wake up and see you in the headlines of the newspaper because you didn't survive the night because of how cold it's going to start getting. And in those moments, I don't know if that was a wake-up call for that client, but about a week later or so, I had found that they had taken the opportunity to move into temporary housing elsewhere. And when I said that to the client, she said, I don't care. It's okay if I die, and this is the type of place that some of our flood survivors are in. And then once we got them rehoused, we were able to start working on the other home-related needs. And Habitat for Humanity was actually able to partner with us to get this repair done. And it's actually my first client that I got back into a home after a full rebuild needed to occur. And so when we had the dedication of the home, we did an interview with my client, and they asked what she wanted to do now that she had her new home. And she said, you know what, before all this happened, even before the flooding and all that, I just didn't want to live anymore. I had lived my life. I'm old, and I've seen a lot, and I was done with my life. And now I want to live, and I have a reason to live. And I like sharing that story because it shows kind of the full picture from start to finish, but it also shows that as much as this was a very difficult situation that many of our community members faced, and we think about this and we think about the tragedy and the trauma and the lives turned upside down, there are actually so many flood survivors that are growing and have become more resilient and strengthened through this and have newfound hope as we move them forward. And so that's really the beauty of the case management process, is we work alongside them empower them, inspire them, instill hope in them and in our clients. When I say them, that's who I'm referring to. And so, yeah, it's a really powerful thing to be able to support our flood survivors in this way, because then they're leaving our case management more prepared to face the next thing that comes their way. And so I see the number 321, and I think that that's just amazing to know that we're having that same type of connection and relationship with all of those clients. And yeah, so that kind of paints the picture of what case management might look like in one situation. So thanks for letting me share that. Katie, are there any other things you wanted me to cover about? Or do you want to jump into funding and all that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and feel free to add, Reagan, as you think. So, Reagan just spoke about a client and the collaboration with Habitat. And that's just an amazing thing that our community and the region has, where we're able to, as disaster case managers, look around to see what is available out there for help first. And then when we've exhausted all resources, that is when the case managers decide to bring the case forward for a funding ask. And so what has happened in the past year is we have done a total for Gladwin, Saginaw, and Midland County. There have been 68 total funding requests made. So Midland County funding table, here's the Midland County requests, and the money stays within that community. And Gladwin County has a separate funding table, and Saginaw County also has a separate funding table. So each community, here's each individual funding request. So there have been 68 made, and they can range from, somebody who lost their furnace and they needed help. Maybe they got a portion from FEMA, but it wasn't enough to cover or the whole replacement. Or it could be, like Reagan just said, an entire rebuild. And so each case is looked at individually. Each, homeowner is looked at with what resources they have to bring to the table. And we see where they're lacking and there's an unmet need. And then that is when the funding ask is brought. And in-kind materials are also a huge part of the collaboration. We have resources and materials that were donated, and then volunteers that are also arranged through United Way. And so the volunteer hours that have worked for this previous year, this 2020 year, on the rebuild of our area, the volunteer hours that we have totaled have been 29,454 volunteer hours. And when you put a dollar value to that, it is over $800,000 worth of volunteer time that we did not have to pay somebody to come in and do cleanups, painting, hanging drywall. Some of the volunteers are very skilled, and some could be someone like me, where all you could do is maybe pick up trash like I follow behind my kids and do. So our volunteers have ranged all over the gamut, and they have saved us having to ask the funding table for dollars by almost $1 million, which is amazing to me. In-kind donations, which have also reduced the need for some of our funding asks, the amounts for our funding asks. The in-kind donation value is over $1 million. It's actually $1,044,821 that have been donated towards the rebuilds of our communities. And those in-kind donations are also able to go to the region and support not just Midland County, but Gladwin and Saginaw. So of the 68 funding asks, the total amount of dollars that have been committed to assist our homeowners regionally is $2,351,197. So that compared to 2017, the total amount that we were able to raise to use was around $900,000. So within our first year, we have been able to secure funding to help over $2 million worth. And so this has helped with obviously rebuilds like Reagan talked about. Some of the houses are in a floodplain, and so codes have changed, and we've had to help people elevate a home or fill in a lower level of their home to make it livable again, because due to, living in the floodplains, there are special requirements that homeowners, if they want to stay at that location, they have to get their home approved into code. And then we also have been able to help with things like furnishing. When you lose your house and you get money from FEMA, SBA, a loan, you're not thinking about furniture. You're not thinking about, oh, I don't have silverware or pots and pans or linens and towels. And we have been able to find through St. Benny de Paul, they do a thing called the Home in a Box kit. And we have been able to purchase 50 of those kits in order to put back into the community to help people once they're ready to move back in. They will have everything that they need to move in and get resettled into their new home. And so those are just some of the dollars, some of the hours, and the things that have gone into our first year of rebuilding our communities. But the next thing that I would like Reagan to really touch on is how we actually were blessed during the COVID pandemic. I know it sounds kind of silly for me to say it like that, but due to the pandemic, there were local colleges and universities that had students that were lacking internships. And so we were able to collaborate with Michigan State University, CMU, and SVSU, and receive turns that were able to help us reach survivors. And it actually was a great time saver, because due to the interns, it allowed the case managers to continue working with their current clients while the interns actually discovered new and upcoming clients. So I'll let Reagan talk about our intern.
Sure, yeah. Our students ranged between, they were either bachelor students or MSW students, bachelor or master students across the state. And this is another example of like us not being able to do this alone. We really have, we're really better in this recovery together. And so we had about 16 students assisting us, and over the course of their last semester, they reached out to over 1,300 of the flood survivors within Midland County. I know that it was far more than that regionally, but I only have the numbers in Midland. And so it's been challenging within this disaster, having 3 or 4 case managers in Midland, and knowing that we have thousands of households that are affected, to really get our pulse on who is still in need, who are we missing. There's that constant thought in the back of our mind. Are there more folks out there? And we are getting continual referrals every week. It's certainly 321 cases and climbing. And so once we kind of approach this point where our caseloads are kind of full as case managers, our interns conveniently stepped in to be able to make these touch point calls to 1,300 flood survivors in our community to help us understand whether they're recovered, whether they still have additional needs. If they have needs, what are they? So that we can start to understand what the trends are moving forward, how many more flood survivors are out there that may require assistance in case management. And so that was incredibly helpful for us to have those students. And it was also a great opportunity for us to give some experience to the students within our region. So, and I think that led to us identifying over 100 additional folks right in Midland County alone that we've needed to touch base with to explore what additional needs they have at this time. We're finding, just in general, as I talk about the pulse of where flood survivors are at right now, a year later, if flood survivors had resources of their own, they've found a way to recover by now. And so anybody who's still presenting additional needs is very likely a strong candidate for case management. And so it's just, there's fewer people every day that we're hearing from but often the folks that we're taking on right now had some of the most complex situations. So.
You ready for me to go?
Yeah, Katie.
Okay. And so that's just kind of a snapshot of what has occurred in our first year with case management and funding and collaborations within our community. But we wanted to kind of also let you know what we have coming up in our next year. The first main significant, awesome development was we received a grant through the Michigan State Police and FEMA. And what they have done is they have given us dollars to put into supplemental help, is what they called it. So what that means is that we are able to take our current employees, like I said, we had 6 disaster case managers and a part-time construction manager. And we are able to take their jobs and their salaries that were promised to them and actually move them, transition them into this grant that the state police created for us. And then that alleviates or frees up more dollars in our local communities to put towards the rebuilds and the unmet needs for our survivors. So we are transitioning our current employees into the grant to be paid. And that also includes their office supplies, their mileage, because as a disaster case manager, a lot of your time is spent going into the home and doing an assessment and then meeting a construction manager there for them to give a scope of work and a dollar assessment to the needs that are building up in each of the homes. And so this supplemental grant will pay the employees plus all the things that require them to do their job. And we have moved, or we're in process of moving our current employees, but that also allows us, because of the dollars that were allotted for us, to hire more people to help. Because as Reagan just referred, talking about the funding, our case managers are really juggling many cases. And so we have started, and we just actually have hired another disaster case manager in Gladwin who's full-time, and his salary will be paid through this this state police grant. And then we've also hired a construction manager in Midland and a construction manager for Aranac and Iosco County. We have hired a case manager to work in Aranac and Iosco County, because those counties up there, we don't have anybody with boots on the ground, I guess is what you would say, somebody going in there and assessing what their needs are. So through this grant, we actually, I don't know, Alicia, did you have that flow chart that shows our current employees? Is there any way we could show that?
Let me work on that, Katie. It's giving me some technical difficulties, so thank you.
Sure. So I can just kind of go over this, and then whenever we get it, we can pop it up. But so our new hires are construction managers, like I mentioned, for Midland and Gladwin. We kind of combined that position because the resources that are available for those two communities intertwine quite a bit. And so we've hired a person to work in both communities. Aranac and Iosco is also a combined construction manager position that we've hired. We hired a disaster case manager in Aranac and Iosco. Like I said, one in Gladwin, and we are looking to add to another case manager in Midland. So that's one we are currently looking to add another employee for. But the other thing is the collaboration that this grant has allowed us to look within our community for people who are already doing certain jobs and bring them on board to work alongside us, but also compensate them through this grant through the Michigan State Police. And so our volunteer and materials coordinator, Bree Sklar, she has been working alongside us from the beginning, and her job is to access the materials and the volunteers in our area. And so with this grant, we've actually been able to put her position through to be paid through the DCMP grant. And we've also hired an assistant to work with Bree to make sure that, when we have volunteers coming in, all their needs are met, and the materials are there for them to utilize. So we've hired an assistant to work with Bree. And then we have what we're calling construction coordinators. And that is a collaboration with Habitat for Humanity. We're bringing on Eric Ostrander and Katie Owens, who are kind of overseeing once we start projects. They're making sure that they continue to flow and move in a positive direction and in a timely manner also. So as you can see from this flow chart, at the top is Nancy Money, and she is overseeing this entire program. And the kind of brownish yellow boxes we have yet to hire. So those are things that could be up and coming in this next year. And this grant is, we have it for 1 year to a year and a half, depending on how the community needs, continue to develop. And so the purple boxes represent people that we already have in place. And so I'm right by the cursor showing the supervisor of the disaster case managers. And then you see to the right, the area materials and volunteers, that's Bree, and our assistant is Nathan Miller. And then just below, you can read all the different case managers that are for Midland, for Gladwin. And then the blue boxes are volunteer people that currently have in place too, that are not taking a salary, but still are active and vital parts of our whole process. And so that's just kind of a snapshot of what we have to come, hiring and the finding more clients and using all our resources that have been given to us with this DCMP grant to continue to move people into recovery. Reagan, and another thing I guess I want to bring up, since Nancy isn't here to address this, is some of our regions, Aranac and Iosco, like I said, we just hired somebody to make calls and to find the unmet needs in that region. But one of the problems that we were finding is that the community in Aranac and Iosco had not put together any dollars for rebuilds or things like that if they were to come up. And so Nancy Money and myself have been working with UMCOR, and we have asked them to see if they would be able to give us any funding for unmet needs for those communities. So our concern was, if we have a case manager up there who finds 10 to 20 homes that need to be rebuilt and there's no dollars to do it, it kind of just adds a whole element of frustration. And so Nancy and I have been working with UMCOR to secure a grant for funding to help with the rebuilds in those areas. And so that's just one of the extensions that UMCOR has done, other than providing the initial disaster case management training. UMCOR is still a collaborative part of our recovery and making sure that all communities in our region can recover to the fullest extent. Another upcoming situation that we have is interns still. They're not making the whole blanket list of calls to thousands of people. We've actually started incorporating them into more of the recovery process. And I would like Reagan to kind of touch on what's up and coming with interns.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually had one intern last semester that was fairly impressive. She was super flexible and it was able to support us in a lot of ways, and in both Aranac County and in Midland. And she asked if we had any opportunities to support her with her public health field work placement that she needed. And so it's actually really cool, because instead of just assigning a list of flood survivors to call, we were able to use her skills and her knowledge of public health to help promote our the new FEMA funeral assistance for COVID deaths program. And so she's been developing information surrounding that and reaching out to nonprofits within the community and healthcare places in the community, funeral homes, things like that, and individuals that we know are affected by the loss of a relative due to COVID. And so that internship is occurring over the course of this spring and summer, and is gonna our intern is going to leave us with kind of a program and a process that we're going to employ for the next year or so to help people access those FEMA funeral assistance dollars. So it's really cool that now that we're starting to, a year later, get our bearings on flood recovery, to be able to, we are a disaster recovery group, to be able to provide that support and infrastructure for our community members to access other types of disaster recovery related resources, because really our community right now is experiencing not only the aftermath of this dam failure, but also a global pandemic. So that is what we have one of our interns actively working on right now. And we have a MSW student who will be starting in the fall for a full year supporting us. And we're really excited about the potential for her to be able to support our group in an intentional way. And in a lot of different social service programs, there is a specific person dedicated towards doing the intake of people who may be eligible for a certain type of program that your organization may offer. And before we had our interns, all the case managers were just sharing the load of doing that intake portion of the process. But with these two interns, the one currently, her name is Kayla, and our intern that will be transitioning to have us to be supporting us starting in August or September, we will have a dedicated person who's able to do that intake portion of the process, so that we can more effectively distribute cases based on the existing caseload of each case manager. So we're excited about that as well.
So just to kind of conclude, thanks to the DCMP grant, which is through the Michigan State Police, we are able to hold our positions for the next year to year and a half to continue to collaborate with our local community and utilize all resources plus all funding that has been generated to help people with the rebuild. So, going back to the video we watched at the very beginning, I can't wait for in a year's time that all these green spaces that we're seeing, I feel like the majority of them will be filled back with houses and to be able to see people, because I feel like that's really what lacked in the video is, you see these physical locations, but it's bringing the people back into the communities that they love and they want to be a part of. And, a disaster took that away from them, but due to our resiliency, we're going to be able to bring them back. And I feel like it's stronger. Working and doing this in 2017, there was a lot of learning lessons that we took away from it. And then to come back just 3 years later and be able to do what we've done in a year's time, in 2 years, I feel like it's going to be just an amazing thing to see a time stop from, going from 2020 to 2021 to 2022. And the nice thing is that we continue to learn. We continue to take what we've gone through and use it to better ourselves and our community. So I know that this area, the Great Lakes Bay region, is just going to be an example for our whole state and our whole country on how to work together and accomplish great things.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And I'll just add that we know that flood survivors are still out there, so that with assistance needs. So I'm going to drop the disaster case management phone number in the chat. Please refer anyone that you know that may still be experiencing needs as a result of the dam failures, or needs as a result of COVID funeral assistance debt. So you can refer them to that phone line.
Thank you, Reagan and Katie, just for providing us a bit of that history and context as to, where we have been, what has been done, and really what is to be done next. A lot of credit to the FEMA grant dollars that were allocated into our community. And I think that it's just really important noting that FEMA grant dollars aren't allocated unless there's an identified breadth of need and severity of need. And so it's not to, exploit or amplify the current needs that still exist, but it really is just the reality that we do have a long way to go, as both of you mentioned. And, we now have some of that consistent funding structure through the grant that will allow the team and the growing team to be able to do that. So I just wanted to give a moment here to encourage anyone that might be on the line that has a question as it relates to anything that was shared or as it relates to those next steps of the direct service of flood recovery. If you have questions, please drop those in the chat here in the next couple of minutes as we're closing up, and we would be happy to navigate answering those questions. I appreciate the data and the information that was shared from both of you today. And I do have to say too that, as at the Community Foundation, as part of the long-term disaster recovery group, we have the opportunity to engage in this ongoing dialogue and work of flood recovery. And I just think it's this really beautiful opportunity that while there may, 68 financial support requests, right? Like that might not necessarily hit home as to this resonating number. Please know that there is so much more beyond that as well. That isn't just in those financial requests. They are in the discretionary funding opportunities that our case managers have. They are really in the totality of the requests and needs met outside of that financial support committee as well. And so I appreciate all of that information and storytelling shared.
I think that's a really good point, Alicia. I know in Midland County alone, we've been able to access local dollars and local resources in some way or another for 83 of our clients. So that's far more than just the 68 funding requests at financial support committees that have happened across the region. So so true. And then Emily asked that I speak the number as well as typing it in the chat for the people watching the recordings. The disaster case management line for the region is 989-374-8000.
And then I wanted to add to quickly the Gladwin County case managers that we have had. Their funding source is different than Midland County, like I said earlier, but the case managers there have been able to access through FEMA dollars over 1 million additional dollars generated since they started work in July. So, when people initially applied to FEMA, they got assistance, but through the work of Carla and James, who are case managers there, they have actually added over $1 million to those people in that community that needed it for wells, because we're all aware that when you watch the video and you see the water table has dropped, wells obviously are drying up. And so the fact that Carla and James work so diligently, over a year later, to continually appeal to FEMA to get water for people so they can stay in their homes. That's just another thing. That's not a funding ask. That's just them continually writing letters, calling the people that we're in touch with FEMA. And Midland does that also, but that's just something super unique to Gladwin and their needs. So that's just something I wanted to throw in there also.
And speaking of Gladwin, I do see Stefan's comment or question in the chat. And as a result of the disaster that occurred in May 2020, whether folks were below the Sanford Dam or not, there were actually 5 counties that were affected by the flooding. And so I think that's why we're shifting more towards this regional approach now that we have some regional grant dollars. So it was Midland County, which includes Sanford, but also Gladwin County, Saginaw County, Aranac County, and Iosco County. And Gladwin, Aranac, and Iosco are all north, but they all were seriously affected by the flood waters that occurred from all the water and the rains that were in the region. And so hopefully that answers that question, Stefan.
Thank you both for answering those couple of questions and points. So not necessarily seeing any other specific questions. Why don't we, end on this note? And again, just a sincere thank you to both of you for coming to share information.
I think Giblin wants to say something.
Sure. Oh, you just muted yourself though, Stefan.
I think he raised a hand before.
Okay, you're off mute if you want to go ahead.
He raised a hand before.
Yep, no problem. Did you have something you wanted to make a comment?
Not me.
Oh, okay.
Okay, then sorry. I thought somebody raised a hand. Sorry.
No, that's all right. Thank you. If anybody did raise their hand, please feel free jump off mute.
Christy, this is Gib Giblin. In responding to Stefan, I did make the comment that I don't have a number of how many houses were affected in Gladwin. Do you guys have a number on that? Because I've been up there. I mean, we've worked on some houses up there, but I've never seen a number for just Gladwin County as far as what got flooded. Do you have any idea?
So I don't have the number in front of me.
Okay.
We have FEMA registrations that I could actually get an actual number from, but I don't have that in front of me. But if if I'm able to, I would love to get you that information.
Okay. I think it would be interesting because Stefan was, I can understand he's looking at a map and he's going, okay, why would they have been affected? Because it's across the lake and stuff. So it would be interesting.
Yeah,
So,
and just
I was just going to mention the wells. So one thing that totally shifted as a result of the dam failures was now there's not all this water pressure from these lakes. And so the water table has basically sunk and moved, and so many people have lost their everyday access to water. That was a huge thing affecting people in Gladwin County, whether their home flooded or not. And that is something that FEMA actually created funds and allowed people to access assistance for. And so a lot of the casework that's occurring in Gladwin is helping advocate for those clients to get the FEMA funds that they deserve to get their wells re-drilled. Some of these wells are having to be drilled hundreds and hundreds of feet deep, where they used to be 50 feet deep or 75 feet deep. And so that's a newer type of fund for FEMA too. So on their end, they struggle to provide people with those resources because they're why would we? That's not personal property. So even people on FEMA's end in this large organization are still learning. So that's a large part of the work that's happening in Gladwin County.
And then the one thing I wanted to add is why this disaster is so widespread is the geography of Michigan itself. Michigan is called the Great Basin because it's a bowl. So you have this bowl that over the days leading up to our flooding and the disaster of the dam failures, the whole state received so much rain that as it rained for days, it started to collect, and the watersheds that are set up in the state of Michigan, over 60% flow from the Aranac-Iosco down into Midland and Saginaw counties. So that's why the disaster is so widespread, as the rain covered the whole state, and then it flowed, unfortunately, right to us. So that's kind of a little bit of geography why this area is so large that was impacted.
Thank you. And just to kind of full circle it, we will make sure to get that information out as to just some Gladwin statistics, because I do think that is important to make sure as we approach a regional look that we are just being clear with kind of that breakdown as we know it to be. So more to come on that. And then we did just want to put on everyone's radar and hopefully your calendars that our next community Zoom call will be scheduled for Thursday, July 8th. It will be at the 10:30 time slot. And really, we're going to be taking an intentional look at housing needs and resources in our community. And really, it's a twofold conversation. How housing needs manifested initially upon the short-term housing needs as it related to immediate housing, temporary housing, and short-term housing. And then also, what does housing look like long-term? What does that look like for our community as it relates to what we need to look at years out to bring back some of the housing options or increase housing options and resources within our community? So hopefully you'll join us for that call. And I appreciate again everyone for coming and joining in this dialogue and conversation today. And I hope everyone has a good rest of your afternoon. Take care, everybody.